Galina Singer is a writer and she's a relationship coach. She's certified in somatic healing and sexology. Galina helps clients build fulfilling relationships with others from the foundation of self responsibility. So there's that whole aspect of self, reconnecting to their body and finding safety to be themselves. That is so beautiful. Galina, welcome to the summit.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So, I know that you also come from like so again when I was looking through your website many years ago, you and I came into this work rather not haphazardly, but we had a different background. So can you maybe share your journey with writing, with becoming a relationship coach, like from your own unique lens? What drew you
Yeah.
to this work?
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to tell the story. And I'll try to make it as brief as possible. But, it all started with me just wanting to be a good girl. So, I was tried to be a good daughter. Then I was a good student. Then I was a good, I got a great job. Then, I thought I'd marry and have children, all that in order to get to some sort of happiness or that sense of fulfillment that everybody seems to be promising me if I do these steps correctly. And when I got to my early 40s, I started realizing that although I was always trying to be as good a girl as I possibly could, and pleasing others and bending over backwards and doing all the kind of required things in the sequence that was more or less, appropriate and kind of um, considered, good in terms of timing. I was just started unraveling and realizing that I did all the right things, and yet I'm not feeling particularly fulfilled in my life. Although again, if you look at my CV, if you look at the kind of social status type marks, it was all there. So in order, so like thinking that I would be a writer was completely actually impossible. I couldn't ever imagine. And when I started realizing that I have this incredible need to self-express, before I dared to actually call myself a writer, it took me a long time because even that was like, who the hell do you think you are? And what do you mean writer? And, I was born and raised in the Soviet Union, so Russian culture with all the incredible background of artists and writers. So again, calling myself one just felt like a ridiculous statement to begin with. So it took me a while to start daring, and then one day I did, and my first article got published. And, I guess since then, everything, like once that dam broke, there was no stopping me. I just continued with articles. Then I started, I got myself into social media, and just like ever since probably 2018, I'm writing regularly, posting like daily on Instagram. And now I have my weekly newsletters. So the writing is just kind of like breathing now. And I realized that, and then of course journaling, that was part of the process of becoming. I that saved my life. So that's how I became the writer. And coach was also. I mean, when all this started happening, there wasn't even such a thing as coach. We didn't have Zoom. I mean, none of these things. I mean, I think if somebody were to ask me all those years ago, well, what do you want to be? What do you think will make you happy? I had no idea. And I couldn't certainly decide that I was going to be a relationship coach. It all kind of happened through my own process. And the more I wrote and shared the insights and discoveries from my journey, the more people started coming and kind of sharing their stories and then wanting to understand, how to move forward and yeah. So it all kind of happened in a very organic and natural way, but something that I could have never predicted.
I love this. And I'm smiling like this big smile. I don't know if you can see. It's because, again, there's so many similarities in our journey. So I too, like check all the boxes, do all the right things, immigrant Indian parents, really working hard, an only child, all of their hopes and dreams I felt were on me. And then just also some unique personal circumstances where I just always felt like I was the parent and always the responsible one. And helping them through. So I didn't really get much of a childhood. And then I found that I started unraveling in my early 40s as well when I got restructured out of my corporate job, which, holds a lot of identity because you're a dean's honors list, you did 3 degrees, you're class president, you're this, you're like, there was just failure was not a word in my terminology. That was just, I was perfect, right? Is perfectionism was the thing. And when you get restructured, your identity shifts. There's a lot of shame, right? You feel like a failure. What are you going to do now? And that was actually my turning point into finding myself as an entrepreneur. But as a kid, I'd always journaled, and I'm also, a best-selling author now. But so writing was always kind of my release as well. So being able to call myself also an author, then come out into the world as a coach, and I started off as a self-relationship coach because really that's what I had to do to like throughout my whole life, but especially in my 40s was another time where I really needed to come back to who I was and really focus on healing that part of me to bring the balance and the life outside of me that I really wanted to create. So today we still do we still do the same things, you and I. I think I call it soulful success. So we've just redefined it differently, but I think we approach it the same and we went through that same experience. I bet every single person on this, on the summit who's listening to us either live or on the replay, because there's so many that are going to be tuning in via replay. I think all of us have had those moments that redefine us, that just cause us to stop in our tracks and really necessitate us kind of going deeper and excavating some of those things and healing and working through so that we can move on to that next level of us, whatever that is for us.
I love that. I didn't realize to what degree our paths were similar. Yeah, there is a lot of, and
And
I think,
you're my person.
and
Love
and
you so much.
I celebrate you also for, and I think ultimately it's funny. Yeah, the way we call each other, I almost have trouble actually putting words to how to call myself, how to label myself. I don't like to do that anymore. But at
I
the same,
agree.
in our world, I guess,
We
people
need labels. People don't
some
understand.
kind of labels, even if we don't want to be imprisoned by them in the end. But yeah, I mean, for me, it was really going just like you, going into understanding who I was underneath all the labels that actually brought the fruit and the juiciness and the treasure that I'm now sharing with others, and I have the privilege to teach others as well. And
Love it.
so
I love it.
and
And you're
so yeah,
passionate about relationships.
yeah.
So how does that factor into all of this?
It's exactly what I was coming to. I realized because by then, when I started unraveling, I was approaching 20, 25 years of marriage. The children were by then in their teen years, and life just was feeling very, very differently. Um, and so I started having trouble in my relationships, both with my 3 daughters and with my husband. And I was very unsatisfied and confused and thinking that there was something wrong with, my partner, for example. And the more I was digging in and the more I was exploring my own feelings and my own um, experience within my body, the more I was attuning to that, the more I was realizing that I came into my relationships with a huge, heavy backpack of stuff, other people's ideas about love, other people's, experiences, some of my own pieces of trauma from the past, some of the stories that I've inherited that were not even mine. And this is what I was polluting my relationships with and not even being in my relationships in the present moment. So that was a huge, powerful insight and revelation for me that I came with a backpack. I came with some, distorted expectations and beliefs that are now polluting my relationships. And that the common denominator in all of my relationships was me.
And that's hard though. It's good because you have the power. So first of all, you have to be aware, right? And you can't be in victim mode and saying it's you, you, you. If only would this happen, then this would be like this. It's saying, oh, it's me. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I need to do something here. It's very liberating to take that power back, but it's also very scary. And it's also very hard work when a lot of who you are is built on years and years of certain ways of thinking and patterns. And how do you even begin? How does one first and foremost cultivate that awareness that it might be them and
Yeah.
not others?
Yeah. It's, you know what, and yes, it's liberating looking at all of it now, but honestly, when I realized and was mirrored back by my teachers at the time and mentors that the common denominator was me and that there was something in me that was co-creating the situations in my life, it was the most difficult, painful moment in my life. Really, one of the more difficult moments because it really required me to question something that I wasn't taught to question. And it's incredibly destructive for one's ego, isn't it? Because again, you're like
It's
digging
very
in.
humbling.
It's very humbling. And I was kicking and screaming. I really didn't want to go. So, yes, awareness. How did awareness came about? I started noticing things that were surprising to me. For example, my children would be doing something like being rowdy or playing loudly or laughing loudly. And I noticed that I would respond to them differently depending on my inner state. So it wasn't what they were doing, contrary to our beliefs, right? We always think that I did it because they, or he or she. So I started realizing that I could respond to the same stimulus differently depending on how well I'm doing. Like if I'm well, if I'm rested, if I am happy, I'm more tolerant of loud voices and, children screaming and playing. And if I am exhausted and at my capacity and just not well, I won't be able to tolerate it. So, same thing with my husband as well. I started realizing that some things that are that were irritating to me or annoying me, that I realized that he had the right for his self-expression and he had the right for his preferences. And so whatever was upsetting me or annoying me had to do more with me and my needs. Like that's when it started really becoming important, is when I realized that my reactions, my intolerances had something to do with my needs or lack of fulfillment of my needs. And so that's when I started, realizing that there is a huge vast unexplored terrain within me that needs to be studied and understood. Otherwise, also, I often felt stuck. And now I see a lot of, people that I work with sometimes feel stuck in their relationships because we keep on like expecting the change to come from outside. And because we have no control over other people, well, we
Mhm.
have control over our own responses. We put ourselves in situations that we cannot get out of unless we start
Yeah.
changing something from within. So that was,
There's an interesting saying, like if you doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, like it's just not a thing. So, if we're the same person, if we're approaching things the same issues over and over again, right? The dynamic is the same between you and this individual. But you're not changing, so you can't expect to see the change outwardly as well, right?
well, because we're locked in our patterns, right? We're locked in certain relating patterns. So in order to disrupt a pattern, at least one of the ends has to be changed. We keep on wanting it to come for the change to come from from someone else. But what I noticed is that it takes me to change the way I respond to affect the whole dynamic.
Mhm.
And that was a very powerful finding.
So how do we change our patterns? How do we disrupt those patterns? I think that's really hard work to do.
That's
How
right.
can one start?
I think, again, I think the most important thing in this work, in this life, is to be in tune with our inner world, to own our experience, to own our reactions, to own our, you know, triggers, and to own our pain, so that the more we are in that observer mode, and that's tricky in itself because often when we start observing our inner antics, there is the inner judge that kicks in. And that also derails, I feel, this work because the inner judge just keeps us in that, again, stuck in our own shame or our own guilt or our own sense of inadequacy. And that's not very conducive for change, to change either. So it's super, super important to become this detached observer, and observe a kind of a safe space for yourself, as we call it, so that when you start noticing that you're doing something wrong or that you'd like to do something differently, you can, um, rather than get caught in the self-judgment, you can actually understand, okay, what's going on? What would I like to change here? What would I like to do differently? Or how do I need to communicate this to my partner? Or what would I need to communicate? Or what would it even what does it mean lonely? What does it mean fulfillment? What does it mean intimacy? What does it mean for me? I found that I had to redefine a lot of these kind of words, symbols, in order to even understand what that means to me, and I had to unlearn a lot of these definitions that I just inherited from society at large or from my family.
Even when you say, what would it mean um, to redefine lonely, like, or fulfillment or intimacy? What do these things mean to me? I mean, those are very deep questions. And some of them might make us feel uncomfortable to even ask ourselves that, right? Because we are challenging the status quo. And a universal human need is belonging, love, and acceptance. So, whatever is accepted out there, whatever people say intimacy should look like we want to go with that definition. So in a way, you're blazing your own trail, right? You're going against the grain by daring to think differently or ask different questions.
Yes, and you know what? It doesn't even have to be so necessarily disruptive to the norm. I'm realizing more and more
It's an
that
interesting.
it's because you know what? Into again, like for example, somebody comes to me and says, I feel, unfulfilled in my relationship. I don't feel connection. I don't feel intimacy. And I'm like, okay, what does connection mean to you? What does intimacy mean to, right? Because that was me only, 15 years ago, where I was like, I don't feel connection, therefore there's something wrong with him. Or I don't feel, we've lost intimacy. What does that mean? A lot of people could, especially the word like intimacy, a lot of people confuse it with physical intimacy. And I
Right.
find that a lot of my work with people, who are working on their couples starts with enlarging the definition of intimacy, and that intimacy, before it becomes physical, has to start somewhere much more innocently, with maybe a deep conversation. Or, people are complaining, I don't feel seen, or I don't feel understood in my relationship. And then my question is, do you show yourself? Because like you and I, we were talking about being perfectionists and being the good girls or the polished, people, well, then that means we've been living behind masks for most of our life. That's what happens. So then if we want to, reveal who we are underneath all the masks, that's an incredibly humbling, difficult, and even painful process because who am I even? Yeah, we've been putting masks for as long as we remember,
Mhm.
and wearing these masks, especially in public realm. And when we meet somebody, and it becomes important, then we certainly are afraid to reveal our soft spots. So then nobody can see us until
Mhm.
we're willing to reveal ourselves. And for us to be willing to reveal ourselves means we have to be in self-acceptance, first of all. Because for as long as we're judging ourselves or shaming ourselves for who we cannot, honestly reveal ourselves in our naked truth.
So it starts with self acceptance.
Oh, everything starts with that journey into self, and going into these dark places with a flashlight and not being afraid by what you find. And
What if I know that like maybe the people that are naturally drawn to you, they're looking for coaching because they're feeling a lack of something in the relationship, right? But what if you find that your relationship is already good, but you just want to elevate it? How would somebody go about doing that inner work to make
well,
I think it's more apparent if something's not working, you're more motivated to shine the flashlight and fix it, right? If you're willing to take the ownership
right.
and do work not out there, right? But if it's okay, but it's I just don't want to get uncomfortable, but it's okay, when people say okay, I kind of cringe a little bit because I don't think there's something I think there's more.
Listen, I mean, for me, that just means lack of aliveness within again, right? So for me, um, when people tell me I just don't feel the juiciness anymore, I seem to, I have everything that I need, but I just don't get the pleasure or the juiciness of it. To me, that's a somatic exploration. To me, that's some kind of disconnect from the sensations. And again, being a somatic healer as well, for me, there's so much work still to be done with reconnecting to our bodies and remembering what feelings actually, feel like in our body. What does because so much of our relating happens mentally in our imagination. That's where also, I work a lot with intimacy versus fantasy because I feel that so much of our relationships are based in fantasy, and even our desire to change our partner is also a fantasy, and that's an escape from a present moment, because in the present moment you have the partner that you have. So then,
Ooh, that's deep.
yeah.
That's deep.
So then the intimacy is actually being with the person in front of you rather than comparing them to some idealized version in your fantasy, which is what so much of what's happening in our relationships.
Oh my
So
God, that was amazing. I can we go back to the intimacy versus fantasy? Like, wait,
absolutely.
how does that show up in our everyday relationships?
It's all the time. I mean, part of our relationship with ourselves is based on fantasy as well. And certainly, when we're raising our children, invariably there is this like everything that we didn't get to achieve as a child, we want our child to
Yes.
achieve, you know.
Yeah, guilty.
That's a form of fantasy. And the
Yeah.
interesting thing about fantasy is that it's escape from a present moment, which, if you want to take it further, is a trauma response, right? Because if all of us post trauma, we're not like, we cannot face the present moment, right? When in the present moment, the feelings become too uncomfortable, we escape, whether into substance or trying to change or work on our partner or escape and find a new partner. So for me, again, intimacy is actually being here now, being in the present moment with everything that's coming up for you, learning to
So
be with it. Mhm.
I love this. What if being in the present moment, uh, it's messy, right? Because you said it's all the stuff, right? So if it's messy, but you're yourself, for example, we just had a parent, like parenting expert come on. You were talking about raising regulated children, and that starts with like regulating ourselves as well. So, how do we regulate ourselves through the mess to stay present with this,
Mhm.
whatever we're feeling, and not move into fantasy? Is there any, how does one do that?
Well, that's again it's being self-responsible once again, right? It's understanding there are a series of practices that you have in somatic work where the capacity to stay with your feelings, as difficult as they may be, that's the skill, that's the mastery, so that even in the moment of dysregulation that's happening, whether your children are tantruming or your husband is, or any partner comes home from work and are dysregulated or they're stressed out about something, to be able to stand in your own anchored in your own experience, which is different, is everything, right?
How do
So
you know if you're anchored?
yeah, well, that's again that it takes a lot of rewiring because we're so hyper focused on what everybody else is doing and feeling. I find that a lot of my work with women, particularly, centers on leaning out, not ignoring, acknowledging, seeing this, but we're working a lot on sovereignty, and that sovereignty is defined by the delineation of your body, by your skin, for example. So whatever is happening in your body is yours to own, including the state of your nervous system once you become that aware. So, a person in front of you may be having a meltdown, but you can, even in that moment, connect to your own breath, feel your feet on the ground, and realize that that's not my experience. I don't need to be engulfed or get co-dysregulated with this person. I can remain in my own sovereign truth, my own sovereign experience. And it does wonders for relationships. In my experience, you can turn around because in my experience, when we're in codependence, which is where most of us come from, unfortunately, when we're in codependence, we cannot feel anything different than what's happening in the family, right? Like if somebody is struggling, everyone has to struggle, or you feel disloyal, or you don't belong, etc., or you feel they call you selfish and everything. Whereas I feel that where we are going, where we want to go, which is interdependence, if you're able to regulate yourself in the moment where everyone else is melting down, you actually have the power to bring everyone up rather than bring yourself down to them.
You shift that energy upwards.
Yeah, I mean, because if you are, if difficult words or hurtful words are being spoken, if you can remain calm and not like, you know, go into it and basically the more we go into conflict, and everyone contributes fuel to the fire, the more it just gets to, completely
Explosive.
oh, yeah. Whereas if at least one person remains calm, and that means you are in the present moment and not in amygdala, which is survival mode. If you remain in the present moment, if you remain connected to your breath, you have access to prefrontal cortex, which reminds you, where are we? It's not, them versus me. We're a team. We're in this together, etc., etc. So if you can remain in the present moment, if you can remain regulated, the way you respond can now turn the whole thing around.
Okay. So I'm just thinking about, say, your children, for example, or even your partner. Obviously you love them very much. You care about them. And you mentioned codependency. I think that you hit the nail on the head there. Like many of us come from codependency, and it's easy for us to slip into those habits, right? I'm a good mom if I got to take this and I feel this so hard. How does one stay sovereign but still exercise compassion and give space for somebody to deal with their stuff? And if they're younger people who aren't
Mhm.
yet developed, and we have a role to help develop them, I know that we can show them by leading by example and being like, if we're calming and grounding, then maybe we're holding space for them, understanding them, showing them that we understand our calmness and our groundedness helps them cope better, right? Rather than making it volatile. But let's say it's like your husband then, who already should have the same kind of emotional maturity or depth that, like, like adult,
They don't. They
okay.
let the change. Be also very realistic, which is also part of intimacy and sovereignty. Let's be
Yeah.
realistic. Most of us are not emotionally intelligent, and most of us really do not know what to do with our feelings. And if anything, I feel that women are overall better equipped because since childhood, women were allowed to talk about feelings. We were
Yes,
allowed,
mine don't cry. They don't,
right?
you don't
When
do
we,
this, you
when we
don't,
don't,
yeah.
that's part of the way we regulate our emotions. Men don't have that. So they carry enormous amount of unresolved emotions, enormous amount of unresolved, trauma, wounding, whatever it is, unexpressed. So anytime there is a conflict that triggers them, they obviously, it all comes out. Um, so I think the should is important to remember that there isn't such a thing, really. I think we need to, what I'm finding, since most of us are still learning to even, where it hasn't, healthy relating hasn't been modeled for us. Nonviolent communication hasn't been modeled. We're learning as we go along. It's a trial and error. A lot of it, you stumble and you pick yourself up again and you try again. So what I started realizing is that when I understood how my system operates, I started understanding what happens to my husband when we argue. Because he's like, when I understand stress cycle, the whole curve of it in my body, I can understand what's happening for them. And in that moment, what's super, super important also is that I no longer take, this is a very challenging thing to do, but I no longer take his big feelings personally. I don't take it as, I don't view it as a threat, and I don't take it personally anymore. And the more I can remain calm, the quicker our, the the conflict can end, and the easier it is and the shorter time to repair.
How
So
do we
I think,
communicate when how do we is there any skills or strategies that you recommend that we implement to help improve communication with our partner
yeah,
in
I
these
think
situations?
absolutely. And I mean, it's a lot of trial and error. It's a lot of trying, but I think the most important thing is to remain, again, in self-responsibility. I think anytime we start with you did or you said or
Just
it's
never
not
good.
going to go well. It's not going to do what we want to do. It's kind of, I think Marshall Rosenberg, who wrote Nonviolent Communication, I think he called that a suicidal way of, communicating. If you start with I feel this when you do that, or even better, I'm not available for this for this tone of voice. I think asking for a pause is super, super healthy as well, where you can actually interrupt the escalation and you can say, you know what, I want to have this conversation, but when we're both calm, something like that. So that you communicate that this is important to you, but that talking about this in this kind of, state is not going to bring the results that we both seek.
I love that. I'm just kind of role playing. I'm just thinking, something happens. It's a difficult conversation. Somebody's heated. So you're saying, I need to pause. Like, let's come back when we're calm. But what if like people don't come back to it because they'd rather maybe just bury it under the rug, save the one off, or it's an uncomfortable topic. It's a difficult conversation to have. How do you circle back when there's been some time that's elapsed?
Well, that I want to answer in two ways. First of all, when we're in our self-responsibility, any conflict just brings to the surface what's been brewing all along. So, for example, for me, as a co-creator of my relationship, I go and I be with my feelings and I explore and I excavate what was that all about? What need was not being met? What did I perceive as a threat, et cetera, et cetera. Often I found that when I understand what was going on, often it's my inner child actually who was trying to run my adult relationship. And then I step into the reparenting mode and I just do what needs to be done for my inner child. My husband, it's not my husband's responsibility or anyone's responsibility for that matter to nurture my inner child. It is my responsibility to nurture my inner child. So what I found is that often when I found what was actually going on, it was about me coming back to me nurturing me and me kind of addressing what was going on. Um, after all that, I find that there's still something that I need to communicate to my partner about what happened or about what they said, or then obviously we're waiting until everyone is calm. And then another thing is often we find when we are ready to talk, we just go and start spilling it. And if they're not ready to talk, we don't get the result we need. And again, it could even like I'm an expert in this with my own relationship. So I've tried it in every way. So what I'm finding is actually asking like your partner um, when they may have the capacity, so you can say, listen, I wanted to, you don't even have to say about what. You can just say, I wanted to bounce something by you, or there is something important that I wanted to touch base on. Can you let me know when you're available to talk? And I find that that's so respectful. And sometimes when I introduce these techniques, some people are like, what? I need to ask permission to even like for my own, I don't know, child or my own partner. And I'm like, yeah, isn't that so respectful? Nobody is ours. Do you know what I mean? The people that we're relating with live in their own bodies with their own nervous systems that are completely out of our control. They're going through their own life experience. So the fact that we are ready to talk about something doesn't mean that we just go and kind of vomit, to use the dramatic word, our feelings on that person. So I find that, this kind of checking in with them if they're willing and ready to talk is such a good, respectful way of trying to connect again.
I love it. One of the parenting expert, when when you said respect, that was one of her words that when she wanted to embark on the journey of motherhood, she wanted to embody that in her relationship. And so it's a common theme. We're also seeing nervous system regulation being a common theme, coming back to self being a common theme, and all of these things, right? In terms of how to fuel ourselves and our body. So it's just nice because we're looking at igniting our light, right? That is the whole premise of the summit. And I'm just seeing so many interconnections, and it's a beautiful organic journey that all kind of point inward, right? So, how do we, like you mentioned, inner child work? I speak that language. I'm very wooey, and psychological. My husband's a psych major as well in one of his degrees. Um, However, we talked about the differences, gender differences between being connected to our emotions. So I might say, okay, I'm going through something sovereign in my skin. I own this. I'm going to do the inner work, figure it out, maybe reparent my inner child. That all makes sense to me. But if I see somebody out there, because they're not me, so I'm not responsible for them, holding space for them, we'll address things when things are calm. But if they have been so dissociated from, because they're men, potentially, but they've been just so dissociated from their emotions, being able to feel emotions, let alone process them, how do we how do we connect them to the concept of inner child and inner child work? Like, I don't know, are men as open to that or aware of that
Yeah.
based on their
I work with men, and a lot of my work with men is about inner child, actually.
so
Because
do they
they're
know it
so
coming in, or
close.
is that
You know what? I think we talk about, well, I think my work is definitely including the inner parts, so
Mhm.
you can work with it archetypally, you can work with it just from the concept of inner child. We can call it a younger version of you.
Right. That's
I
just a
think,
label.
yeah, it's just how do you want to call it for them to connect to it better. But again, I don't think it's our job to teach our partners unless they ask. And I find that even holding space, because you mentioned something about holding space, it's not there should be a professional as well, because I feel that sometimes we hijack each other's energy by demanding that they hold space for us. Whereas, if you're familiar with Esther Perel's work, for example, it takes a village for us to have our needs met.
Mm.
And to just expect that this one person is going to be everything, it's unrealistic anyway. So for me, the more people we can involve in our lives, the more, and I know that there is huge resistance to like go and get professional help and everything, but I think to have a neutral space where, uh, people can express themselves, knowing there will be no consequences, no retaliation, because again, when we're with our intimate partners, somebody with whom we share our life, if they share something that is potentially difficult, we may not be able to handle it. Whereas if they go and work it through with a professional, to me, I think that's just so helpful to have other people in our lives to pick up the pieces. I think it's too much to expect a partner to do that kind of.
Fulfilling. Yeah.
Most of us are not skilled anyway.
It's interesting. You said that, and I had a smile on my face because this summer we did a road trip and we went out to a very fancy dinner. It was a hibachi dinner one night, the whole family. And we were sitting beside a group of girls at a bachelorette party. And then there was a 40th birthday beside my husband. So we were just, there was a lot of celebration around us. And the bachelorette group, they had to do all these dares and, there was a language difference. So we are speaking in a, half English, a lot of gestures, and they asked us for marriage advice. They asked both of us for marriage advice. And my husband's advice to them was something, there was like an actual saying, like I cannot articulate it right now in my mind, but it was something about like you they can be your everything, but you can't do everything. Like you can't do everything without like, you can't expect them to do everything or be everything. Like, and my piece of advice was about listening. Always listen. And then we kind of looked at each other like, oh, because that I tend to interrupt when I get excited. Like I'm a good listener, but I'm not, I'm a work in progress. And so he was just like, oh, listening is, because that's something that he always tells me, like, you need to work on that. Like you sometimes, take over,
Yeah.
He's very quiet and he'll just take it in. He'll just keep going and I'll just keep. So anyways, it's interesting that he had mentioned that exact thing that you had mentioned. So how do we I'm cognizant of the time here. This is such an amazing conversation, and I've definitely there's a lot of things that are resonating, a lot of things that I want to take away from this. But if you were to tell us, if you wanted us to remember one thing or take something away from this conversation, what would it be? And also, do you have any practical suggestions for us to just start? So what can we do today to start working on that, either inner or outer relationship? It's one and the same, really. Uh,
Listen, I mean, for me, I think the best way to start interrupting the way we've been doing things that may not be working is to notice. For me, anytime I start focusing on something on outside of me, like, he did this or she did this, or take yourself back, like, because you're basically siphoning your energy into some place where you'll get stuck. It's the solution. A resolution will not be there. Bring it all back to you and ask yourself, what does this feeling say to me about my needs? Right? So whatever we're feeling, whether we feel betrayed, whether we feel hurt, whether we feel, whatever is happening, the tendency is to go and like start spinning about him or her and label them and diagnose them, and all that. Whereas you're just wasting your time. Bring your attention right back to you, connect to that achy place within, and really interrogate what is going on there. You'll probably stumble on your inner child that needs your attention.
so a good journal prompt may be like, what is this triggering in what? Or
I would say, what does my feeling tell me about me?
oh, I like this. What does my feeling tell me about me?
Yeah. Not him, not them, but me. What does it tell me about me? What's the need there? What's the little younger maybe voice trying to tell me? Um, and that's the beginning of everything.
I love that. And that's just a very simple question, but it obviously can really enter some very deep, profound realizations and work trigger points. So I'm definitely going to take from this the role of the detached observer, almost like in this experiment with yourself, right? You're constantly just kind of going in, what do you need right now? How's this making me feel? Why do I feel this way? So I'm gonna take it. That's what I'm gonna, and the status of self-acceptance. I think that was really, or the state of self-acceptance. I think self-acceptance is hard for people.
Well, because we've internalized every criticism
Everything.
we've ever heard, you know? So by the time we're adults, we're just a walking compilation of every judgment that we've ever heard. And I think that that's actually what makes it, to kind of just buttress the point you were just making about being a detached observer. And I think you cannot really be a detached observer if you are in a dysregulated state, because then you are drowning in your feelings already. What's really, really important is to, try to remain present so that you can be the observer of the feelings, not the one who's drowning in them.
I like that. Okay.
Right? Because that's what, when we are in the throes of our feelings, when we're drowning in our pain or that sense of, hurt or that sense of unfairness, it's very difficult in that moment to say, what does that mean about me? Because we're in pain and the energy is moving through our body and we want to just, we want to spill it on the other person by something hurtful, make them hurt the way we are. So it's super, super important to work on to both things that we discussed today, being the observer, but also not letting yourself drown in the feelings. So, to continue being um, the observer of the feelings and not, drown in them.
That's very powerful. Thank you so much, Galina. Before we sign off here, I just wanted to check in with our audience. Any questions or comments or takeaways? What is the key takeaway that you got from this chat? I would love to hear what you think. And while people are typing, Galina, I would love for you to share how people can continue to stay in connection with you, follow you, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I have my Instagram account, Galina Singer. I have my website, galinasinger.com. I have a Substack account which I started a few months ago, and that's something where I post a lot of my archives, not only my more recent articles, but a lot of my archives. So basically my whole process, ever since I started documenting it. And I think a lot of people connect to my earlier work because I'm really like explaining and kind of really documenting the unraveling and then reconstruction of myself from scratch. So that's in my Substack
And is that
account.
is that Galina Sinker? Would that
Yeah.
also be your name? Okay.
I-
Well,
I think, wait, I forget something, but yeah, Galina Singer. I think if you probably put it in,
okay.
you'll see. Learning to
Wonderful.
love.
Thank you. Learning to love. I love that. Thank you so much for everything. We're ending on a high note. I mean, we have had wonderful speakers throughout. Everyone had some really positive, inspirational takeaways. And I think just honestly, the world is all about relationships, right? Whether it's your children, whether it's your workplace, whether it's your spouse. So learning to deepen that connection to relationships all really fundamentally stems from deepening your connection to yourself. So this
And
is a
that's
very important topic. Thank you so much, Galina. And I look forward to finding you on
like
Substack. Pleasure.